Right, let's make a start. So, video 4, exploring points in depth. Now, the previous 3 videos, I've gotten them down here. Video 1, we looked at understanding the differences between the 10-mark questions. So, you've got your outline and explain questions, you've got your 10-mark question with an item. We looked at the differences. Our focus is on the outline and explain questions. Video 2, we looked at decoding the question. So, what is the question actually asking us to do? We looked at the topic and focus. And in video 3, we created a mind map of potential points. Now, because I've got a question as an example on here, some of you will be following along with that question. Some of you will be using your own question. So there's a lot of flexibility here. But video 4 is going to be focused on taking those points from the mind map and selecting a few and really going into depth as to what they actually, how they help answer the question or how they link to the question. So for this video, what you'll need is a selected 10-mark non-item question. You can use the one in this video. It doesn't have to be the same one. You can use any one that you want, as long as it's specifically a 10-mark non-item question that follows the outline and explain to principle. You also need knowledge of the topic and focus of the question. So how A affects B or how one thing affects another. And then finally, it will be very beneficial for you to, it will be very, very beneficial for you to have a mind map of potential points that you could use to answer the 10-mark question. Like I said in the previous video, we spent some time creating that mind map. The hope is that going into video 4, you have a mind map of some sort with points that you can start to use to go in depth. And then the video objectives, finally. So we're going to be selecting points generated in the mind map. It's going to be down to you which ones you want to start with. We're going to begin to explore these points in depth using our knowledge and resources. So what I mean by that is the knowledge that you currently have, combined with any supplementation of notes that you've taken or any resources available on Teams or whatever you want to use, textbooks, all that stuff. You don't need to use it completely from memory if you don't want, but likewise, if you want to test yourself, this is a good opportunity to do so. And this is the final part to the objective is we're going to practice this method for as many times as needed. So what that means is, unlike the previous videos where it was very much a you listen, you watch, a task is set, you complete it and move on to the next video, you can spend a long time on this one if you want. The more time you spend doing the activities described in this video, the better it might be for you if you feel like you need it. So a few things before we start that I do need to mention, and it's really important. Let me get a highlight here. So choosing the right points is not black and white. You know that you need to write down 2 points for outline and explain. You already know this. You don't get more marks for doing more than 2 points. But that also means there are multiple correct points to make for the answer. You could take 5 different students' 10-mark answers, and you could give them 10 out of 10 marks, and they'll all likely look very different. What actually matters more is a blend of suitability and your knowledge. So your knowledge, obviously the more knowledge you have, the better, but it needs to be knowledge around a topic that actually answers the question. And sometimes it's very easy to forget that. You need to be able to link those two together to the exam question. So like I said here, suitability, choosing a point that has a higher relevance to answering the question, and knowledge, your ability to write about the point in detail. So demonstrating your sociological knowledge, names, studies, concepts, etc. That means that you shouldn't rush into the answer. So when you're in the exam, you're not going to have all the luxury of time. You've got 15 minutes or so to answer the question. But you shouldn't rush in with the first 2 points in your mind. Think about it. Think about the relevance of the point. Think about how much you actually know about the point. Can you write enough about it to get the marks? And finally, this is going to take some practice. So, and that what does that even mean? Well, it means repetition, first of all, repeating the skills that you need and being able to think outside the box, being able to give it a go, even if even if you aren't sure that you're doing the right thing. This is the time to do it. Don't do it in the exam. Do it here. Okay. I know, obviously, that's why you're watching this video in the first place, but I think it's very easy to lose sight of. This is until you're in the exam, anything goes. Any practice is good. Okay, so moving on. If you watched video 3, you'll see that this mind map it's identical. It's the exact same mind map, which is why we made it. I also discussed about trying to categorize points. I wouldn't worry about that too much. I'm more focused on the practice of writing out the answers for now, rather than the categories. That's something that we can always come back to. So, we've got all these potential answers, or potential points that we contain into answers. How do we pick one? How do we know which one to pick? Which is the right one? Unfortunately, it's going to be, or fortunately, whichever way you want to look at it, it's going to be down to you. Okay. The key, like I said earlier, the key isn't that there's one right answer. You need to make that point relevant. If the point is relevant and you have the knowledge, it can work, right? Having said that, there might be a few that stand out to you as a lot easier to pick. There's one to me that stands out, and it might not to you. It might, depends. But for me, the easiest one to start looking at is going to be financial differences. Okay. So now that we've picked financial differences, let's start. Oh. Okay. And this process of, well, what the task we're about to do is going to be messy, and there's going to be a lot of talking, there's going to be a lot of thought process, and I would encourage you to do the same when you're trying to develop your points. So, let's start here. Now, we're going to need to be more specific than financial differences. So, I've given it some thought myself, and one way I would like to take this this planning phase, is to turn financial differences into something along the lines of you don't have to do it like this, but this is how I'm planning to do it. So if we look at income instead. Income differences. And then that's where we're going to start. So you could be more specific. So if you really wanted to have an example of it, you could talk about low income in a consumer society, so choice limitations. So we understand if we start at the very, very beginning, this is what we understand. And if you want to follow along with this, as I'm trying to explain points, if this is the answer, if this is the example that you want to go along with for answering the question, then follow along. If not, then you can listen to the process or you can skip this. It's up to you. So, what we understand is we need to focus on social class and consumption. And now I've interjected with income differences. So, how is social class and the income differences linked? How can they possibly be linked? So, and you might want to write this down as you go along your thought process. So, how is social class and income with social class and income linked. So now what we have here is the foundation. Every point I make underneath this is trying to answer this, and then eventually you have to go to how does this affect consumption? Okay, before we start, there's no easy fix here. You're going to need knowledge. You're going to need knowledge, you're going to need resources, and you're going to need to be willing to give yourself a chance to make some mistakes, backtrack, cross things out, rethink things. This is our opportunity to get our thoughts onto paper into some sort of tangible, plan, so then we can then start to actually answer the question later on in the next video. So this is going to go all over the place, but what I would suggest you do is start with the very basics. So if we talk about this, basics. Okay. So we know that social class can have an impact on income. Okay, that's a very broad brush, I understand, but I'm sure you understand the where I'm going with this. So social class Okay, well that's a statement right there. Well, how? Well, what's happening here? We need more than just social class can impact income. So why don't we try and separate social classes? Well, if we go with working class, they are more likely to have low income. And then conversely, you could say that middle class equals more income. This isn't really demonstrating any particular sociological knowledge, but we're setting a foundation. So, if working class have lower amounts of income, how does that relate to consumption? Are you going to have more money for consumption or less? Or less means for it? Well, typically, what that will look like is less money for consumption. And then, again, conversely, so high income is going to mean more money for consumption. I know this might look very repetitive, and you might be thinking to yourself, obviously, this makes sense, but we need to set that foundation so we can go more in depth and apply our sociological knowledge. Okay, so if working class have lower income, and that means less money for consumption, and then middle class have a higher income, more money for consumption, who has a reduced ability to engage in consumption in society? It'll be the working class. So what you could say here is this results in reduced ability to engage. Go down here. Excuse my very poor handwriting on this. So this results in reduced ability for working class to engage in consumption due to the low amount of income. Okay. So is that the end of the answer? No, absolutely not. But what you've done is you've set the stage in your plan. So now what we've done is we've essentially made a link. We've now justified why we're talking about income and social class and the impact on consumption. So how do we develop this? Well, we need to look at what you've learned in sociology. We need to look at if there's any examples we can think of. So, and this is where the 10-mark questions become very independent and flexible. You need to think about what you've just produced, and you then need to think about, does this link to any studies that we've done? Can I think of any key theories that this might link to? Any real life examples? Because this is all well and good, but this is just theory. There's no examples here. So why don't we look at the concept of identity? Now, you don't have to take this answer in this direction, but we understand that in society today, identity is shaped by consumption, and social class is part of identity. So therefore, we can talk about identity because we're talking about social class. So if we have social class here, our consumption choices are dependent on that. Therefore, it's ingrained in our identity as to who we are because of that class. So why don't we start talking about identity? So identity here is to change it here. So social class and then consumption. Now, if you can think of any studies, any theories that you might want to start talking about, now's a good time to do it. So for this example, I'm going to talk about Bauman. I may be pronouncing that wrong, but you'll see where I'm going with this. Now, the reason why I'm adding a sociologist theorist now is because it allows me to enhance my AO1 knowledge. So if you know the date, put the date in there. So 1997. It's more important that you know the name more than anything else, but more detail the better. And what do I know about him? Well, what do I know? What was put in the research? So I'm aware that we have a consumer society, and we all engage in it. Well, let me rephrase that. Many engage in consumer society, and our ability to engage in it is dependent on our income. So all right, so it's dependent on income. So then we bring it back to the points we raised earlier. We have the seduced class. Well, the seduced, we'll just say that. And then we have the repressed. What I'm doing here is I'm demonstrating my knowledge. The examiner is going to see that you know what you're talking about. So, seduced. Those are people who engage in the consumer society, who engage in consumption. They're seduced because they're enticed by what they see, but they have the means to engage. Have the income to engage. And then the repressed don't have the income to engage. Okay. So then, why is that relevant? Well, in terms of the repressed, let's go back to the seduced first. They are more likely to be middle class. And then the repressed are more likely to be working class. Okay. So the seduced can engage, that's fine. If the repressed can't engage, then you could argue that their social class is affecting their consumption abilities. Because they can't engage. They can't engage. However, you could go further and say that those that don't engage, or those that can't, it's going to marginalise them, or you're going to be shunned from the social groups. So they can either continue as they are and not engage at all, and then they're shunned. And the reason why they're shunned is because they can't fit in with what everyone else has. So, for example, not the latest mobile phone or designer brands. The only way that they can fully engage is if they are willing to go into some sort of debt. And if you want to use a real life example, which might help with your A2, is we have what we call buy now, pay later schemes. I'm going to put buy now, pay later. And if you want examples of that, a really good one to use would be Klarna. Klarna to help maintain the image, yep. Now, is this answer perfect? Is this going to get somewhere? It's a start. What you would need to do is you would need to, develop these points in an actual structure. And there's a couple of things you can do. For analysis, You could discuss the idea of, does this apply to everyone? The answer to that would be no. What about any theories that you can put in? How might Marxists, for example, look at this? It's just an idea. Obviously, you would also need to link it back to the question. But this isn't about answering the question completely. This is just about getting your thoughts down. Once you've done this, what you'll quickly see is strengths in your knowledge and areas of weakness. You'll also very quickly find out if the point that you had highlighted originally in the mind map can answer the question. If you get to a certain point in this discussion, in this process of writing stuff down, and you hit a roadblock very quickly, it's either that it may not be the right point to use for you, or it might be that you need to brush up on some knowledge, or you might want to go back and pick a different one and then try this one later. There's a lot to play with, but the whole purpose of this activity, and I'm hoping you can see why we've done this, is for you to actually get the thoughts down. It's very difficult to articulate a 10 mark answer in your head without writing something down. Sometimes we feel like we know exactly what we want to write, and then we put pen to paper, we can't do it. And sometimes we think we have an idea, we're not sure, we start writing, ideas start flowing. And this is just one way to take the point. So you may look at the concept of social class and income, and you may want to take it a different route. This isn't the only answer, but it's one potential answer. Okay. So what I want you to do going forward, I'm going to put to do, because I didn't make a list earlier. Silly me. You're going to spend as much time as you need in this section. So complete this. For as many times as it takes. Until you're confident with the process. If you are pretty confident in the 2 points that you want to pick, then do 2 of these where you essentially just write down your thoughts and then move on. If you wanted to, and it would be good practice, you could do this activity for every single potential point you put down in your mind map if you want to practice it as much as possible. So there's 2 camps you can either be in. You can either be in, I'm going to keep doing it until I've done every possible answer and then I'm going to choose. Or you could say, I know which 2 points I want to pick. I'm going to go with them. I'm going to go to the next video and then we're going to develop the answer. Okay. There's no right or wrong answer there. It's just what you feel comfortable with and what you want to do moving forward. So I hope that was useful. I understand that this one is a bit of a long one, and I do hope that you're able to follow along with my thought process as I essentially put all my thoughts onto paper myself. If there's any questions, please, like usual, feel free to reach out. We are here to obviously support you with that. So any questions or comments or anything you want, covered elsewhere, please do. Don't just sit there and try and do it without any support. Okay, I'll see you all in the next one. Take care.